I'm Dave Ochmanowitz. I'm running for school board here in Quakertown Community School District, and this is Kayla Mitchell.
Hi, everyone.
We were asked by the community some questions in a group submission form that we let out. And what we want to do is answer some of these questions to the community and encourage you guys to get out to vote for us November 7th.
Our first question.
The first question is there any chance of your team trying to bring back team time and teams to the middle school? All right. Well, I think that's a really great question. Directly, the school board doesn't implement team time. However, the school board allows for the resources to be available to the educators and the administrative staff to make their teachers available to have those resources. Team time provides a lot of value and merit. I've spoken to a lot of the teachers that miss having it because it allowed them to concentrate specifically on individual students at individual times during their educational growth. Some students may only need 6 months worth of individual attention, and some maybe need a little bit more. But that gets them over the hump to get up to par. And if the teachers don't have time to work with one another to talk about your child or the students within our school district, unfortunately, they may not get the help they need and perpetually be behind.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's really an invaluable time for teachers to be able to share amongst each other maybe some of the behaviors or concerns or even gifts that you're seeing within certain students that you'd want to discuss and as a team. How will you handle the current situation of Tohickon Valley Elementary closing? Would you listen to the advice from the parent committee with an open mind? Will you base your decisions on research-based data when looking at changing elementary school configurations? Let's see what else is in here. Okay, let me just address those first. So the handling of Tohickon Valley possibly closing. From my understanding and doing some research, and by the way, I think it's very important to look at factual database research when making these types of decisions, because otherwise you're just going based on, I don't know, emotion or feeling, and you really need to look at the data in order to make the best decision. So I would say, I really think it's unfortunate that we closed Milford Middle School first because Tohickon Valley Elementary was in a lot worse shape. And I would have done that a little differently. I would have closed TV first. And I just want to mention that, we weren't supposed to be closing any schools until we made a plan and built new schools. So I think it is very unfortunate that, from what I understand, the recent redistricting committee that I went to, I was told that they are presenting on options to close Tohickon Valley, and so they're going to be presenting that actually this week, I believe, to the current board, and then the new board that's going to be elected, the very first board meeting, they're going to be expected to make a decision on this. I was vocal at the last meeting, and I don't think that is a good idea. I think, the very first board meeting that you're attending as a new board member, you really need time to assess and be thoughtful and make a good decision. I think that is part of the issue with this board, is that we rush into making decisions. This is a really big decision. And while I've done some research, I still feel like there's a lot more information and questions that I have. And I'm going to be, of course, very open to the parent committee who've spent a lot of time and effort on figuring out the best way to, redistrict the children. And my biggest concern is when I went to this meeting, that the next couple years, our elementary schools are going to be busting at the seams, really, really packed. And so I have some concerns around that. And I have some more questions about that before I, would feel comfortable making any decision. Because I feel like right now our class sizes are already pretty high. And I know, and research tells us that lower class sizes really make a difference when it comes to educating.
I have to agree with most of what Kaylin said. Small class sizes do make a difference, especially in the elementary level. As I continue to mention, individual attention to the students is so very important for their educational growth throughout the long term. and we need to make those resources available to our students in our community.
What are your thoughts on renovating and expanding Neidig? So Neidig is actually the school that my oldest son attends. And it is obvious when don't get me wrong, the school is great. We love the school. We love the teachers and the staff. But if you look at it compared to some of the other schools in the district, there's definitely a difference. And there are a lot of renovations that are required and needed. I did speak to quite a few staff members actually at Neidig in regards to this. And we don't want to continue to kick the can down the road and not make the necessary repairs, because I feel like that's the situation that we're in now, is we have not invested enough money into these renovations. So I think it's absolutely needed. I did ask about where did they get the number. It's like 20 million in order to renovate Neidig and expand it. And part of that is based on the Schrader report, which was the report that basically details all of the renovations for all the schools that are required to bring them up to parity to the new schools. So I do think we need to make renovations at Neidig. As far as the expansion, I'm not 100% yet on that because I don't have enough information. I don't think it's a bad idea, especially if we are going to close some schools and we do have growth. It seems like the majority of the growth is going to be in Richland Township, and in particular in the area close to Neidig. So I definitely think, it's not out of the question. I just won't have a firm position on that until we really get a little bit more information.
Yeah, and I think that's been part of the problem so far, is limited access to data and going off of reports that have been furnished for us that have overestimated numbers that have some people scratching their heads. And that Schrader report specifically, when you're bringing that institution up to par with the other institutions, they're overestimating those numbers. Like, we don't necessarily need new basketball nets. We don't necessarily need a whole new gym floor. And some of those numbers were including things that the school doesn't need. And so having enough time to reevaluate all that information with a different set of eyes may be extremely beneficial to the course of action that our school district takes next.
One thing I just thought of is the priorities in spending. So if you look around all of our facilities, there's some much needed repairs, and instead we decided to spend money on, over $1 million or about $1 million for a dance studio, $4 million for practice turf fields. I want to make sure you understand that I don't think those in general are bad things. In fact, I think they're wonderful. But I also think it's important that we prioritize our spending and make necessary repairs to schools. Before we invest in dance studios and turf fields, we should make sure that our facilities are in good condition. What are the plans for the Milford Middle School property? When is construction due to begin on the property by St. Isidore's Church? The last time I was informed about Milford Middle School, I was told they were going to mothball the actual building, which just means they're going to sustain it. They're going to do the minimal amount of work to keep the building operating for things like storage. When is construction due to begin on the property by St. Isidore's Church? I believe there's no plans currently in the works to build on that land, which it's kind of frustrating, I think, for me and probably a lot of others, because we purchased that property with the intention of doing just that. So we weren't supposed to close schools until we built new ones. So the biggest risk, I think, for us at this point is if we do close Tohickon Valley, we're looking at busting at the seams in terms of capacity with all of our other schools. And if there is a big influx of students, new homes that are being built, which we know there are, then we could be in a very tough, a tight spot and have to pretty quickly build a new school. And at this point, it's hard to say if we would have the ability to do that with the current bonds that we already have issued. We'd have to take on a whole lot more debt. We are uncertain about the property tax changes. So there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of risk there. I think that's sort of my biggest concern, but no plans that I'm aware of to build on that property at this time.
The next question is, do you think high school teachers should be forced to issue marking period grades no lower than 50% regardless of the student's actual grade? I think this is a really great question, and to be quite honest, I would like some more input from the teachers in regards to this strategy. And I think one of the things the school board, if they're in charge of even making this decision on the grading structure, would be to take on the valuable input of the administration staff and the specific science teachers to see if this is the best strategy for the particular students in our district. More information definitely would help me come up with a more finite quantitative answer. And I think that both Keith and Jenny feel the same based on our conversation. I also feel like, based on my conversation with teachers and an administrative staff, that they don't feel like that their input and their feedback on how everything is going is being valued and highly considered by the current school board. To me, they're the most important players in all of this, because without the staff having a great feeling of enthusiasm, that feel like that their input is valued, and that when they go to work every day, that what they do every day is making a difference. It's not good for our students if that's not happening.
Yeah.
And that input is very valuable, and it is extremely important that as a board we take into consideration the people whose feet are on the ground every day educating our students, take their feedback and use it as best as possible.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think this is probably sort of a leadership style in a lot of ways, because you have leaders who don't necessarily like to take input from those who are on the ground. They prefer to just make decisions on their own. And then you have others who really value the input of, those on the front lines and really doing the actual work. And I know that this team truly values the opinion of not only the teachers, but also the community. And that's an important part of, the things we want to change, is making sure that the community does have a voice. They feel like, that their voice is being considered when making key decisions. How do you feel about the ballot question on this November's election, the proposed constitutional amendment amending the homestead property tax assessment exclusion? I don't know that our team is really all on the same page as far as what I feel about this, but so just speaking for myself, I think I want to say up front that I believe we should have a more balanced approach in terms of funding for our schools. And when you look around the rest of the country, most states have a better balance of property taxes, income tax, and sales tax. So there is a lot of burden being placed on, especially seniors, those on fixed incomes. After speaking to many of the folks in the community, I have heard stories time and time again that people feel they never own their homes, and it's just a big burden for them. So I think that we need to make sure to keep that in mind, and we need to solve for this problem. The problem with this bill is we would be responsible for whatever debt that we currently have in our district. And so that would mean that we would be responsible for not only the income tax increase as well as the sales tax increase, but we'd also be looking at paying the existing debt for, decades. So we'd kind of have it's like a double whammy. I don't know that it really solves the problem that we are wanting to solve. So at this point, I am in favor of finding a way to release some of that burden on our fixed income folks, seniors, and just everyone in general. Property taxes are really high, especially in Quakertown. They're higher than a lot of other places in Pennsylvania. So I'm not sure this is the right solution, but I am definitely open to and feel we should look at a balanced approach in how we fund our schools.
We know that you have other jobs, but will you ever volunteer in our schools, get a chance to see how incredible our teachers and staff really are, and be able to meet the children that are the most important part of this position? I have to say, we, as the four of us, as a group, have spoke about it, and we all have full intent that after we're elected to go on a tour of all the schools, the ones that we haven't seen yet, of course, and engage ourselves to view the classroom as it goes down. We want to see how the schools are run and speak to the teachers during a regular business day, and it's my intent as a school director to have the ability and the capability to do that at a few points during the year if possible. I really feel that seeing how the motions are working will have an important effect on how I make my decisions moving forward. I do think that the current board is a little bit disconnected on the day-to-day on how things are done and the way teachers feel and the way parents feel and students feel. I believe that some time ago they rolled out a plan that they wanted to do, and over the years, despite all the things that have happened, they're maintaining a plan that is now in the wrong direction, and we hope to correct that direction and re-steer the ship in direction of our students and teachers.
Yeah, and adding to that, it's unfortunate due to the fact that our schools are funded primarily through property taxes. What you're seeing is the reason many of our board members are interested in being on the board is so they can reduce their taxes. That's the primary thing that they are interested in, and that is a very important part of the job, is being fiscally responsible and good stewards. So I think that's extremely important. But at this point, we have one board member who has a child in the district, and I feel there is something to be said when you have parents on the board who, have skin in the game. Their children are actually being educated under this system, and we don't really have a good perspective on our current board. So I think it would be great to have parents give their input and their perspective in the decision-making process. Okay, we had more than one question about transparency, so I thought I would address this. I know a lot of us don't feel there is a whole lot of transparency in the decision-making with this board, and so I'll just give an example of that. So when it came to the decision to close Milford, again, this is a decision that the facilities committee was led to believe that would take place after new schools were built. So, the whole time they were making this assessment, they're under that impression. And then at the very last minute, they made the decision that that wouldn't happen. And so I think really keeping people in the loop and being honest and open about the decisions that you're making, that's so important to your credibility in the community. And when they had a hearing to close Milford, they chose to do that in the district office, which was not enough seating. And so my husband actually was one that was turned away. There were several people. My husband noticed at least 30 that were turned away and weren't allowed to give input. So I think, that's unfortunate, and it's decisions like that to keep people out, to keep their voices from being heard, that needs to change. We have to really let our community know what our end game is.
This question is there a way to undo some of the actions of the current board and district superintendent that you feel are not in the best interest of our students and community? I think that's a really great question, because it really allows us to point out how important it is to have the right candidates run for office. In a best case scenario, which we are all hoping for, 4 of us new candidates are going to be elected in the school board. That's still a minority. And so we will need to obviously work with our constituents on the school board to come to some of these conclusions, to make sure that if there is something that needs to be undone, we need to have some of them on our side, which goes to show why the next cycle is going to be so important as well. We plan to work very closely with the existing school board members, and what we want to do is try and put the voice of the parents, the teachers, and the students up front. It seems like that may have at some point fallen off the important things to remember for the current school board. And we want to be that voice for the parents and the students and the community.
So those of you who are not aware, there are 9 board members on our school board. So what that means is, 5 is a majority. So as Dave mentioned, having 4 of us on the board we may not be able to overturn every single decision, but we can certainly advocate for what we believe in and have discussions and be at the forefront of those decisions and make sure that the community is heard throughout that process. So, despite maybe not being able to be a majority in all situations, we'll certainly be able to have a conversation and have maybe even some debate, which I think would have a really great impact. We have a question about the current board self-promoting newsletter sent out to all taxpayers. Who funded this? Is it legal? It appears to be a veiled attempt to campaign at the public's expense. And you're absolutely right. So I'm sure a lot of you, if not all of you, have received the newsletter sent out by the current board, which highlights all of their accomplishments. There's very little mention of students, teachers' accomplishments. It's really, hey, look at me, I did such a great job. And that was paid by
The school board, your tax
your
money.
tax money.
It was a obvious piece of literature with shameless self-promotion all over it. If you read through that newsletter and you see the positioning of the name drops and you look at what was printed on the fold, a story from almost 2 years ago in regards to them working closely with the teachers union, there's no mention of who wrote these articles or who the authors were. And if you just don't take our word for it, read it for yourself. It clearly is a shameless document of self-promotion, and though it may be legal, we find it to be very bothersome.
Yeah, and another point of concern is, we had a communication specialist in our staff, and that person happened to be in that position for quite a while. And the board decided it was a former teacher, so they decided to put her back into a teaching position and hire the previous Intel journalist who, if you noticed, had some pretty favorable articles to write about the current board, and now they are having him step in. And that, again, that's a net new position because we're putting a teacher back into a teaching position. So it's about a $55,000 a year salary, which during a financial crisis, is this something that did we really need to make that change, and why did we do that? And I think while it's great to have someone dedicated to communicating to the constituents, I find it troublesome that the way all of it went down and how they're really just now wanting to address the issue of communication.
Do we have any thoughts on the curriculum changes to address racial bias and ignorance early in students and the community at large, helping kids to embrace racial differences? One of the things that's very close to my heart is equality and treating people as other humans, regardless of their gender or race or religious background. We all need to treat each other as equals. I feel very, very strongly about that, and it's one of the biggest parts that I think of my values. I think that it's great that we're working out a new program with the Pearl Buck House that is going to help our students, as well as the parents of the students, as well as the staff, be a little bit more aware of and sensitive to things they might say and do. It is very, very important that we, as a community, stand strong for the common good with our neighbors, as well as everyone, not necessarily because they live next door to us, but we need to be fair and equitable to one another because they're human.
I totally agree. Someone asked, what are your feelings about implementing full-day kindergarten for all students, and would you make this a priority? our team, all of us agree that full day kindergarten is super important. In fact, I find it a little bit strange that Pennsylvania does not have a full day kindergarten program. So one of the risk of closing schools is that we will not have the capacity. It's likely we will not have the capacity to have a full day kindergarten program, which I think is very unfortunate. And I know that all of us, here, Dave and I, Keith and Jenny, we all agree that there's a lot of value to a full day kindergarten program.
Yeah, there are huge benefits that come from beginning your education that early, and I think we all can, and all agree on that. That's not a debatable position. What we need to do as a school board is try and harness the resources that we have so that we can expand that program to our community, as opposed to close it off, or because that means students getting out with their peers sooner. That means education starts sooner. That means parents can go back to work sooner. That means it's less expensive for the parents in our communities to find daycare so that they can go to work. There are multiple benefits for having and instituting full day kindergarten, and I hope to help the community embrace that and hopefully expand that program if possible.
So in closing here, I want you to ask yourself a question. Are you satisfied with the current leadership on our school board? Are you satisfied with the level of mutual respect that you're receiving? Do you feel like you have input in decision making? Are you happy with the way our money is being spent? Are you, happy at the fact that maybe class sizes may be increasing? All of these things are really important. And I know, for Dave and I, we decided to run for school board because we wanted to have a better future for our students and for our community. It's super important to us that we get involved and that we speak up and speak out against things that we feel are bad decisions. And really the only way that we're able to make a meaningful impact and change in this process is if we get on the board. And we know that as parents that we'll be able to provide a different perspective, a balanced perspective in terms of how our schools are operating. So we want to be a lot more forward thinking. We want to look at the big picture. We don't want to rush through decisions. We want input from our community and from our teachers. And so that's why I think it's very important that you get out and vote November 7th for Dave and Kaylin. I just want to remind you all, you can vote for 2. There's 3 of us running. There are 2 open positions. So in Region 1, that would be for Dave and I. And then, of course, there's Jenny in Region 2. She's unopposed. And then Region 3 is Keith McCucci.
So in the borough, please be sure to vote for Keith McCucci on November 7th. And if you are in Milford or that second voting zone, please, or Trumbuyersville and Milford, if I'm not mistaken,
Yep.
Please be sure to vote for Jenny. And if you are in one of the Richlands, 1, 2, or 3, Haycock or Richland Town Borough, please be sure to pull for 2, Dave and Kaylin on November 7th.
Thank you all for your
Bye.
time.